The Midnight Morgue. St. Augustine's Hospital, a once thriving medical institution, has been abandoned for decades. The morgue, located in the hospital's basement, is said to be the most haunted place in the building. The legend goes that at midnight, the spirits of those who died in the hospital rise from their slabs, seeking revenge on the living. Liam, a thrill seeker with a love for ghost hunting, convinces his friends to spend the night in the morgue. Armed with cameras and ghost hunting equipment, they break into the hospital on Halloween night, determined to capture evidence of the paranormal. The air is thick with the scent of decay, and the silence is oppressive as they make their way down to the morgue. The morgue is cold and dark, the metal slabs covered in dust and grime. The group sets up their equipment, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. As they wait for midnight to strike, they begin to hear strange noises, footsteps echoing down the empty hallways, the faint sound of whispering voices, and the unmistakable creak of metal. As the clock strikes midnight, the room grows colder, and the lights flicker out, plunging the group into darkness. The metal slabs begin to creak and groan, as if something is moving beneath them. The whispering voices grow louder, more frantic, and the group realizes too late that they are not alone. The doors to the morgue slam shut, trapping them inside. The temperature drops even further, their breath visible in the freezing air. One by one, the metal slabs begin to move, the bodies of the long-dead patients rising from their eternal rest. The corpses, their faces twisted in pain and anger, surround the group, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. Liam and his friends try to escape, but the corpses are relentless, their cold, lifeless hands gripping their arms and legs, dragging them towards the slabs. The spirits of the dead patients, tortured by their untimely deaths, seek vengeance on those who disturbed their rest. The group is forced onto the slabs, their bodies frozen in place as the corpses prepare to claim their souls. Just as the spirits are about to exact their final revenge, the clock strikes 1, and the lights flicker back on. The corpses collapse back onto the slabs, lifeless once more. The doors to the morgue swing open, and the group is left alone, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they stumble out of the hospital, they realize that something has changed. Their faces are pale, their eyes hollow, and their movements stiff and unnatural. The spirits of the dead patients have taken over their bodies, leaving their own souls trapped in the cold, dark morgue, waiting for the next group of ghost hunters to make the same mistake. The Midnight Train. In the small, fog-drenched town of Hollow Creek, where the nights were long and the mornings slow to rise, there was an old legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. It was the story of the Midnight Train, an ancient, rusted locomotive that appeared only at the stroke of midnight. The townsfolk whispered of the train's ghostly passengers, souls of those who had died in a terrible accident many years ago, forever trapped between this world and the next, searching in vain for a way to reach the afterlife. Daniel had always been fascinated by trains. The clickety-clack of wheels on tracks, the hiss of steam, the shrill cry of the whistle, these were sounds that filled him with a sense of wonder and excitement. But even more than that, Daniel loved a good ghost story. And when he heard about the midnight train, a thrill of anticipation tingled in his chest. The other children in town were too afraid to even speak of the train, but Daniel was different. He wanted to see it for himself, to find out if the stories were true. It was on a cold, foggy night, with the mist hanging thick in the air like a ghostly shroud, that Daniel decided to put his plan into action. His parents had long since gone to bed, and the town was quiet, the streets deserted. Daniel crept out of his house, careful not to make a sound, and made his way through the fog towards the old, abandoned station at the edge of town. The station had once been a bustling hub of activity, but now it stood in ruins, its roof caved in, its platform overgrown with weeds. The air was damp and heavy, the fog swirling around Daniel's legs as he walked onto the platform. He could barely see a few feet in front of him, the fog so thick it seemed to swallow up the world. But Daniel wasn't afraid. He was determined to see the midnight train, to prove to himself that the stories were just that, stories. As the clock in the town square struck midnight, Daniel's heart skipped a beat. The night was eerily silent, the fog hanging in the air like a living thing. And then, faint at first but growing louder, he heard it, the distant sound of a train whistle, a mournful, ghostly wail that sent chills down his spine. A moment later, the screeching of metal on metal pierced the night as the train pulled into the station, its arrival heralded by a rush of cold air that seemed to come from nowhere. The train was just as the stories had described, old and decayed, its once bright colors faded and peeling, its windows cracked and covered in grime. The engine hissed and sputtered, the metal groaning as if under a great weight. The doors slid open with a slow, mournful hiss, revealing a dark, silent interior. Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The train seemed to call to him, a low, insistent pull that he couldn't resist. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a final, echoing clang. The interior of the train was cold and silent, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. The seats were covered in a fine layer of grime, the fabric torn and faded. The train began to move, its wheels clattering over the tracks, and Daniel felt a strange sense of unease settle over him. He looked around, and for the first time, he noticed the other passengers. They were ghostly figures, pale and transparent, their eyes hollow and vacant, their faces devoid of emotion. They sat in the seats around him, their bodies still, their gazes fixed on the floor. As the train picked up speed, hurtling through the foggy night, the ghosts began to stir. Their heads turned slowly towards Daniel, their eyes locking onto him with a chilling intensity. They whispered in unison, their voices soft and echoing, like the rustle of leaves in the wind. Help us find peace." Daniel's heart raced as he realized the true nature of the train. It was not just a ghostly relic, it was a vessel, carrying the souls of the dead, forever trapped in an endless loop, unable to reach their final destination. The train was cursed, doomed to ride the tracks for all eternity, its passengers lost between worlds, searching for a way to move on. Panic gripped Daniel as the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The ghosts moved closer, their hollow eyes filled with desperation and sorrow. He wanted to scream, to jump from the train and run, but his body was frozen, his feet rooted to the floor. The train hurtled through the darkness, the scenery outside a blur of shadows and fog, the station's light fading into the distance. As the train sped on, Daniel realized with a growing sense of dread that he had sealed his own fate. By boarding the midnight train, he had become one of its passengers, bound to ride the tracks for eternity, just like the ghosts who now surrounded him. The last thing Daniel saw was the faint light of the station disappearing in the distance, before the train vanished into the fog, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, the platform was empty, shrouded in mist, with no sign of the train, or the boy who had dared to board it. The villagers searched for Daniel, but he was never seen again. The legend of the midnight train grew stronger after that night, a cautionary tale for those who might be tempted to venture to the old station at midnight. The train still rides the tracks, its ghostly whistle echoing through the night, carrying the souls of the lost, forever searching for the peace they will never find. The Mirror's Promise. In the village of Bleak Hollow, where the nights were long and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own, there was an old belief passed down through generations: never look into a mirror after midnight. The villagers whispered that mirrors were not merely objects that reflected the physical world, but portals to a place where darkness and light twisted together, where something else resided, something waiting for the unwary to make a fatal mistake. Oliver had never been one for superstition. He was a mischievous boy, full of life and curiosity, with little patience for the whispered warnings of old men and the anxious glances of mothers as they tucked their children into bed. He scoffed at the tales of the mirror's curse, told to frighten children into obedience, and delighted in mocking those who still believed. One cold, lonely night, as a thick fog rolled in from the moors, Oliver found himself alone in his small bedroom. The house was quiet, his parents long asleep, and the only sound was the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. The hour was late, and the village was wrapped in a heavy silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling in the cold. Oliver, bored and restless, remembered the stories he had heard, the warnings never to look into a mirror after midnight. He smirked at the thought. What harm could there be in a simple reflection? He decided, in a fit of defiance, to test the old superstition for himself. With a grin, he picked up the small, oval mirror that sat on his bedside table. The frame was old and tarnished, the glass slightly warped with age. Holding it in his hands, he glanced at the clock. The hands crept toward midnight, each tick of the second hand drawing him closer to the forbidden hour. Finally, the clock struck 12. A low chime echoed through the house, sending a shiver down Oliver's spine despite himself. Ignoring the sudden flutter of unease in his chest, he raised the mirror to his face and peered into the glass. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary. His own reflection stared back at him, the same tousled brown hair and mischievous blue eyes he saw every day. He waited, half expecting something to happen immediately, but the seconds ticked by and nothing changed. Oliver let out a relieved, albeit slightly disappointed, laugh. Foolish tales, he muttered to himself. But as he moved to put the mirror down, something caught his eye. The reflection, his reflection, didn't lower the mirror with him. It remained raised, the glass still held in the reflection's hand, as if stuck in a moment that should have passed. Oliver froze, his heart skipping a beat. Slowly, he lifted the mirror again, and the reflection smiled at him. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that belonged to someone who knew secrets, who harbored dark intentions. The smile grew wider, and Oliver noticed something else. His reflection's eyes, once identical to his own, now glinted with a malevolent light, a spark of something not entirely human. "Hello, Oliver," the reflection said, its voice low and smooth, like silk sliding over steel. Oliver's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to drop the mirror, to smash it, but he couldn't move. The reflection's eyes held him captive, pulling him deeper into the glass. He watched in horror as the reflection began to move, lifting its hand to touch the glass from the inside, the same way Oliver's hand held it from the outside. "I know what you want," the reflection continued, its smile never faltering. "I know your dreams, your desires. I can give them all to you." Oliver felt a chill run down his spine. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely more than a whisper. "What are you?" "I am you," the reflection replied, though the sinister edge in its voice made it clear that this was only half the truth. "Or at least, I can be. Let me show you, Oliver. Let me give you everything you've ever wanted. A life of adventure, riches, power. Anything you desire." Oliver's heart pounded in his chest. The promises were tempting, more tempting than anything he had ever imagined. A life of excitement, of wealth and influence, all within his grasp. But there was something else, something that gnawed at the back of his mind, a warning that he was treading into dangerous territory. "What's the catch?" Oliver asked, his voice trembling. The reflection's smile widened, a dark promise gleaming in its eyes. "You must trade places with me. Step into the mirror, and I will step out. You'll have your dreams, and I will have mine." Oliver hesitated, the cold dread in his stomach growing. The reflection's offer was too good to be true, and deep down, he knew it. But the temptation was strong, the promises so alluring. He could feel the mirror's cold surface against his skin, its pull growing stronger with each passing second. The reflection watched him intently, its smile never wavering. "What do you say, Oliver? Are you ready to live the life you deserve?" Oliver swallowed hard, his mind racing. He knew the stories, the tales of those who had vanished, lost to the mirror's depths. But those were just stories, weren't they? Silly superstitions meant to scare children. And yet, what if they were true? His hand trembled as he reached toward the glass, his fingertips brushing the surface. The reflection's eyes gleamed with anticipation, its hand meeting his from the other side. The glass felt cool, almost liquid, as if it would give way at the slightest push. With a final, hesitant breath, Oliver made his decision. He pressed his hand firmly against the mirror, feeling it yield beneath his touch. The reflection's smile widened, its hand closing around his, pulling him forward. The room around him began to blur, the edges of reality melting away as he stepped into the glass. For a moment, there was nothing but darkness, cold, endless darkness. Then, slowly, the world began to come back into focus, but it was wrong. The colors were muted, the air thick and heavy, like a world covered in a layer of grime. The light was dim, as though filtered through smoke, and the shapes around him twisted and distorted, like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Oliver's heart sank as he realized where he was. He was inside the mirror, trapped in a twisted version of his own world. The reflection, no, the creature, had taken his place in the real world, leaving him to wander this nightmarish landscape. "Wait!" Oliver cried, reaching out toward the glass that now stood between him and his old life. But his voice was swallowed by the oppressive darkness, his words echoing back at him in a mocking tone. On the other side of the mirror, the reflection, his doppelganger, turned to face him. Its smile was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Thank you, Oliver," it said, its voice dripping with satisfaction. "You've given me everything I've ever wanted. Enjoy your new home." With that, the creature turned away, walking into Oliver's life, leaving him trapped behind the glass. He pounded on the mirror, desperation clawing at his chest. "No! Let me out! Please, let me out!" But the glass remained unyielding, a cold barrier between him and the world he had lost. He watched in horror as the creature, now wearing his face, began to change everything. It twisted his life, turning friends into enemies, sowing discord and chaos wherever it went. The once bright future Oliver had dreamed of was corrupted, poisoned by the creature's dark nature. Time passed differently in the mirror world. Days felt like years, and Oliver could do nothing but watch as his life was warped and twisted beyond recognition. The creature reveled in its new power, its control growing stronger with each passing day. It ruled with an iron fist, manipulating those around it with a cunning that Oliver had never possessed. And all the while, Oliver remained trapped in the mirror, a silent witness to the destruction of everything he had once held dear. He had traded places, and now he was paying the price, a price far steeper than he could have ever imagined. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Oliver's hope began to wither. The mirror's promise had been a lie, a cruel trick to lure him into a prison of his own making. And now, he was condemned to live out eternity in this dark, twisted reflection of his world, forever longing for the life he had so foolishly given away. In the village of Bleak Hollow, the warning lived on: never look into a mirror after midnight. For those who did would find themselves staring into the eyes of something else, something waiting, always waiting, to take their place. The mirror in the cellar. At the far edge of town, where the streets gave way to overgrown fields and the houses stood with sagging roofs and peeling paint, there was a house that no one spoke of. Its windows were dark, the woodwork cracked and splintered, and the garden long ago claimed by wild brambles. But it wasn't the house itself that made people shiver as they passed by, it was the cellar beneath it, a place of dark legend whispered among the children and avoided by the elders. The cellar, they said, was home to a mirror, a cursed object that trapped the souls of those who dared to look into it, pulling them into a twisted reflection of their own lives. When Jasmine's family moved into the old house, she felt an immediate thrill of excitement. Jasmine was a girl who loved old places, the kind of places that seemed to hold secrets in their creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper. While her parents were focused on the practicalities of settling in, unpacking boxes, cleaning, and making the house livable, Jasmine was drawn to the more mysterious corners of their new home. She had heard the whispers from the children at school, tales of the mirror in the cellar and the horrors it held. But Jasmine was a skeptic by nature. She didn't believe in ghosts or curses. To her, the stories were just that, stories, invented to keep children away from dangerous, dark places like old cellars. Still, there was something about the idea of a haunted mirror that sparked her curiosity. And so, one afternoon, while her parents were out shopping for supplies, Jasmine decided to explore the cellar for herself. The door to the cellar was at the back of the house, hidden behind a curtain of cobwebs. It creaked loudly as she pulled it open, the hinges protesting after years of disuse. A narrow staircase descended into the darkness below, each step groaning under her weight as she slowly made her way down. The air grew colder with every step, carrying with it the musty scent of damp stone and old wood. Jasmine held a small flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the thick shadows as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The cellar was just as she had imagined, dark, cold, and filled with the detritus of forgotten years. Old furniture lay covered in dusty sheets, and crates stacked against the walls were slowly crumbling to pieces. But at the far end of the room, something stood out, a tall, dark shape, shrouded in grime and dust. As Jasmine approached, her breath caught in her throat. It was the mirror, just as the stories had described. The mirror was enormous, its frame ornate and carved with intricate designs that had long since faded. A thick layer of dust covered its surface, obscuring the reflection within. Jasmine hesitated for a moment, a faint whisper of doubt creeping into her mind, but she quickly shook it off. It was just a mirror, after all. With a determined breath, Jasmine reached out and wiped away the dust with her sleeve. As the grime cleared, her reflection slowly came into view. But as soon as she saw herself in the mirror, a chill ran down her spine. Her reflection was there, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. The eyes staring back at her were dark and hollow, empty voids that seemed to suck the light from the room. And the mouth, her mouth, was twisted into a cruel smile that didn't match the expression on her own face. Jasmine blinked, trying to shake off the unease that settled over her. She lifted her hand to touch her face, and the reflection did the same, but there was something unnatural about the way it moved, too smooth, too precise. It was as if the reflection was mimicking her actions with a mocking precision, a puppet controlled by some unseen force. Fear began to claw at Jasmine's heart, but she couldn't look away. The mirror held her gaze, drawing her deeper into its cold, reflective surface. The room around her seemed to grow darker, the air heavier, as if the cellar itself was closing in on her. Her breath quickened, her pulse pounding in her ears as she watched her reflection step forward, out of sync with her own movements. The smile on its face widened, stretching into something grotesque and inhuman. Before Jasmine could react, the reflection reached out from the mirror, its cold, glassy hand wrapping around her wrist. The touch sent a shock of icy pain through her arm, freezing her in place. She tried to pull away, but the reflection was too strong, its grip tightening as it began to drag her towards the mirror. "No!" Jasmine screamed, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the cellar. She struggled, pulling with all her might, but the mirror's pull was relentless. The world around her warped and distorted, the cellar twisting and turning as if it were being sucked into a vortex. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and before she knew it, Jasmine was being pulled into its cold, reflective depths. As she crossed the threshold, the world around her changed. The cellar was gone, replaced by a twisted version of her own life, a place where everything was dark and wrong. The house she had loved was decayed and crumbling, the walls covered in grime and the air thick with the scent of rot. The people she knew were there too, but they were twisted, their faces contorted with cruel smiles and hollow eyes, just like the reflection that had pulled her in. Jasmine tried to scream, to cry out for help, but no sound came from her lips. She was trapped in this dark, distorted world, a prisoner of the mirror's curse. The last thing she saw before the world faded to black was her reflection, standing on the other side of the mirror, smiling that same cruel smile, its dark eyes filled with malevolent glee. The next family to move into the old house found the mirror in the cellar, its surface cracked and dusty. When they looked into it, they saw only their own reflections, never knowing that Jasmine was trapped inside, waiting in the twisted world beyond the glass, her soul bound to the mirror, waiting for someone to take her place. The stories about the mirror in the cellar continued to be whispered, but no one knew the truth. The mirror remained in the cellar, waiting for its next victim to peer into its depths and be lost forever. The Painted Door. At the edge of a once thriving town, where the streets now lay cracked and forgotten, stood a dilapidated mansion, a relic of a time when life bustled through the town's veins. The mansion, with its crumbling walls and overgrown gardens, had long been abandoned, its windows dark and empty like the hollow eyes of a ghost. But there was one feature of the mansion that had always stood out, a detail that made even the bravest of souls shudder, a door that no one could open. The door, set into the farthest corner of the mansion's main hallway, was unremarkable at first glance. The paint was chipped and faded, the wood warped and splintered with age. But those who ventured close enough to truly look at it found themselves overwhelmed by a sense of dread, an inexplicable terror that seeped into their bones and gnawed at their sanity. The door was an enigma, a mystery that had defied explanation for decades. The townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting stories of those who had tried to open it, only to be driven mad by what lay beyond. For years, the mansion remained empty, a monument to the town's forgotten past. But that all changed when a new family arrived, seeking to breathe life back into the decaying structure. The family, the Tanners, had moved to the town in search of a fresh start. The father, David, had taken a job at the nearby factory, and his wife, Helen, had fallen in love with the mansion's old-world charm, despite its obvious state of disrepair. Their son, Jacob, a quiet and curious boy of 12, was less enthusiastic about the move, but he soon found himself captivated by the mansion's secrets. From the moment they moved in, Jacob felt the pull of the painted door. It was as though the door was alive, watching him with unseen eyes, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Every time he walked by it, he felt a cold chill run down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the door was somehow changing, new cracks appearing in the wood, fresh smears of paint that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking. The door seemed to beckon him, calling to him in a voice that only he could hear. The rest of the family seemed oblivious to the door's presence. David was preoccupied with his work, and Helen busied herself with cleaning and restoring the mansion's many rooms. But Jacob couldn't ignore it. The door consumed his thoughts, filling his dreams with dark, twisted images that left him waking in a cold sweat. He tried to tell his parents, but they dismissed his concerns as the product of an overactive imagination. Determined to uncover the door's secrets, Jacob began to spend more time in the hallway, watching, waiting for something, anything, to happen. It wasn't long before his patience was rewarded. One stormy night, as the wind howled through the trees and rain lashed against the windows, Jacob lay awake in his bed, the sound of the storm echoing in his ears. He was restless, his mind churning with thoughts of the door. Unable to sleep, he decided to go downstairs, hoping to calm his nerves with a glass of water. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic knocking coming from behind the painted door. The sound was barely audible over the storm, but it sent a jolt of fear through him. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the door, the knocking growing louder with each step. Standing before the door, Jacob hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on him like a weight. He held his breath, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the knob. To his surprise, the door swung open at his touch. The room beyond was small, barely more than a closet, dimly lit by a single, flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something dark and unnameable. Jacob's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him, walls covered in paintings, each one more disturbing than the last. The paintings depicted scenes of terror and despair, twisted visions that seemed to crawl from the darkest corners of the human mind. One showed a man trapped in a burning house, his face contorted in agony as flames licked at his skin. Another depicted a woman drowning in a sea of black, her hands clawing at the surface as she was dragged down into the depths. Each painting was so vivid, so lifelike, that Jacob felt as though he could hear the screams of the figures trapped within the frames. As he moved deeper into the room, Jacob's gaze was drawn to a painting in the center of the wall. It was larger than the others, its frame ornate and gilded, but what caught his attention was the scene it depicted. It showed a family standing outside the mansion, their faces turned toward the viewer. The father was tall and strong, the mother graceful and kind, and the boy. The boy looked exactly like Jacob. His heart raced as he realized that the painting was of his own family, captured in perfect detail as they had appeared on the day they moved into the mansion. The figures were frozen in time, their expressions blank, almost lifeless. But as Jacob stared at the painting, the figures seemed to shift, their faces slowly twisting into expressions of fear and anguish. The boy's eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Horrified, Jacob stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had to get out, he had to leave the room before whatever force had created the paintings could take hold of him too. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping him inside. The candle flickered. The boy's eyes, once bright with curiosity, were now wide with terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. Horrified, Jacob stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had to get out, he had to leave the room before whatever force had created the paintings could take hold of him too. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping him inside. The candle flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows on the walls as the paintings seemed to close in around him. Jacob pounded on the door, his fists bruising against the unyielding wood. "Help! Let me out," he screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness, the walls closing in tighter, the air growing thick and suffocating. The painted figures on the walls seemed to reach out toward him, their twisted faces filled with malice and despair. In a last desperate attempt to escape, Jacob threw himself at the door, but it was no use. The room was alive with a malevolent force, and it had claimed him as its own. The last thing Jacob saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection in the glass of the nearest painting. The Tanners left the mansion that very day, unable to bear the weight of the loss and the darkness that hung over the house. The mansion once again fell into disrepair, its secrets hidden behind locked doors and peeling paint. But those who passed by the old house would sometimes speak of the painted door, and the boy who had been lost to its curse, forever trapped within the walls of the haunted room. The painted door remained closed, its secrets locked away, waiting for the next soul brave, or foolish, enough to seek the truth. Whispers in the mist. In the small coastal town of Ravens Hollow, the sea mist rolls in thick and heavy each night, swallowing the streets in a shroud of fog. The townspeople have long learned to respect the fog, locking their doors and shuttering their windows as soon as the sun dips below the horizon. For generations, stories have been told of voices carried on the mist, ghostly whispers that lure the unsuspecting into the darkness, never to be seen again. Savannah Gray, a skeptic and aspiring journalist, arrives in Ravens Hollow to investigate these legends for an article she's writing on urban myths. Confident that the stories are nothing more than superstition, she is determined to uncover the truth behind the mysterious disappearances that have plagued the town for over a century. Savannah checks into the only inn in town, a quaint but worn establishment overlooking the harbor. The innkeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Widdershins, eyes her with suspicion when Savannah mentions her reason for visiting. "You'd do best to leave those stories alone, dear," Mrs. Widdershins warns, handing over the room key. The fog doesn't take kindly to outsiders poking their noses where they don't belong. Undeterred, Savannah spends her first day exploring the town, interviewing locals who mostly refuse to speak of the fog and the whispers. The few who do talk share chilling accounts of loved ones vanishing into the mist, lured by voices that sounded eerily familiar. That evening, Savannah decides to experience the fog for herself. Armed with a voice recorder and a flashlight, she ventures out as the sun sets and the first tendrils of mist creep into the streets. The air grows cold and damp, the fog thickening rapidly until visibility is reduced to mere feet. As she walks down the deserted main street, she hears nothing but the distant lapping of waves against the docks. Minutes pass, and Savannah begins to think the tales are indeed just stories meant to scare children. But then, faintly at first, she hears it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the damp air. She stops and listens intently. The whisper comes again, clearer this time, and to her astonishment, it sounds like her late mother's voice, tender and loving. "Savannah, come here, sweetheart." Her heart skips a beat. Her mother had passed away years ago, and hearing her voice now sends a chill down her spine. She rationalizes it as her mind playing tricks, a result of the eerie atmosphere. But the voice comes again, more insistent. "Savannah, I've missed you. Follow me." Against her better judgment, Savannah follows the sound, turning down a narrow alley that leads toward the docks. The fog grows denser, swirling around her in ghostly patterns. Her flashlight flickers, casting long, distorted shadows on the cobblestone path. The voice leads her further into the maze of alleys, each one darker and more confining than the last. Along the way, other voices join in, a chorus of whispers calling her name, some familiar, others strange and unsettling. The cacophony surrounds her, disorienting and hypnotic. Savannah realizes she's lost. The familiar structures of the town have vanished into the fog, replaced by decaying buildings and twisted alleyways that shouldn't exist. Panic sets in as she tries to retrace her steps, but every turn leads her deeper into the unknown. The whispers grow louder, closer, now echoing directly beside her ears. She feels a cold breath on her neck and spins around, but sees nothing except the impenetrable fog. Her flashlight dies completely, plunging her into darkness. Heart pounding, she fumbles for her phone to use as a light source, but it has no signal and the battery drains rapidly before shutting off entirely. Surrounded by darkness and whispers, Savannah starts to run, her footsteps echoing loudly on the wet stones. As she runs, shadows materialize in the fog, indistinct figures that move alongside her, their forms flickering in and out of existence. One steps directly into her path, and she crashes into it, falling hard onto the ground. Looking up, she sees the shadow looming over her, its features becoming clearer, a grotesque, twisted version of her mother's face, eyes hollow and mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. "Stay with us, Savannah," it croons, its voice a distorted mockery of her mother's. "Join us in the mist." Savannah screams and scrambles backward, only to feel cold, clammy hands grasping at her from all sides. The shadows close in, their faces contorted and nightmarish, voices overlapping in a maddening symphony. She musters all her strength and breaks free, sprinting blindly through the fog. Her lungs burn and her legs ache, but she refuses to stop, driven by sheer terror. Finally, she bursts through the wall of mist and collapses onto a familiar street illuminated by the warm glow of street lamps. The fog recoils behind her, retreating as if repelled by the light. Gasping for breath, Savannah looks around and realizes she's back near the inn. The streets are still empty, but the oppressive presence has lifted. She staggers back to her room and locks the door, trembling uncontrollably as the whispers fade into silence. The next morning, the sun shines brightly over Raven's Hollow, the town appearing peaceful and idyllic. Savannah, still shaken, decides to leave immediately, abandoning her investigation. She hastily packs her belongings and heads downstairs, where Mrs. Wittershins awaits with a knowing look. "Had a rough night, did we?" the innkeeper asks, her eyes scrutinizing Savannah's pale face and trembling hands. Savannah nods silently, too exhausted and frightened to respond. As she drives away from Raven's Hollow, relief washes over her with each mile she puts between herself and the cursed town. She vows never to return and contemplates giving up her pursuit of the paranormal altogether. That night, safely back in her apartment in the city, Savannah tries to relax, convincing herself that the horrors she experienced were a mix of overactive imagination and local hysteria. She prepares for bed, eager to put the nightmare behind her. As she drifts off to sleep, a familiar sound pulls her back into wakefulness, a soft whisper echoing through her bedroom. "Savannah, we're still here." Her eyes snap open, and she sees tendrils of fog seeping in through the cracks around her window and under the door, swirling and coalescing at the foot of her bed. The shadows emerge once more, their faces grinning wickedly as they advance toward her. The realization hits her with cold dread: the fog has followed her, and there is no escaping the whispers. The spirits of Raven's Hollow have claimed her, and no matter where she runs, they will always find her, drawing her back into the eternal mist from which there is no return. The last thing Savannah sees before darkness consumes her is the twisted, hollow face of her mother leaning close, whispering softly, "Welcome home, my darling." The Puppet Master. In the heart of a small, isolated town, where the night stretched on forever and the shadows seemed to linger just a little too long, there was a chilling tale whispered among the villagers. They spoke of the Puppet Master, a sinister figure said to control the townsfolk like marionettes, manipulating them to fulfill his dark, twisted desires. Some believed the Puppet Master was a spirit of vengeance, others said he was a remnant of an ancient curse, but all agreed on one thing: those who fell under his control were never the same again. Lily, a young girl with an insatiable curiosity and a love for stories, had grown up hearing the rumors about the Puppet Master. Like most children, she had dismissed the tales as nothing more than ghost stories meant to scare people. But as she grew older, Lily began to notice strange changes in the people around her. It started with subtle things: neighbors who once smiled and waved became distant, their expressions vacant, their movements stiff and robotic. The peculiar behavior spread through the town like a silent plague. The baker who used to hum cheerful tunes as he kneaded dough now moved with jerky, unnatural motions, his hands twitching as if pulled by unseen strings. The old woman who always sat on her porch knitting no longer spoke, her eyes glazed over, her fingers working the needles in a slow, methodical rhythm. It was as if the entire town had fallen under a spell, their free will stripped away by some malevolent force. One evening, as Lily walked home from school, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Standing beneath a flickering street lamp was a man she recognized, Mr. Turner, the town's postman. But something was terribly wrong. His eyes were wide and vacant, his mouth twisted into a sinister grin that didn't reach his eyes. His hands moved in strange, jerky motions, as if he were struggling against invisible bonds. Terrified but unable to look away, Lily watched as Mr. Turner turned and began to walk down the street, his movement stiff and unnatural. Curiosity battled with fear, and Lily found herself following him at a distance, her heart pounding in her chest. The man led her through the darkened streets, past the quiet houses where the lights had all been extinguished, until they reached the outskirts of town. There, at the very edge of town, stood an old, abandoned theater. The building had been left to decay years ago, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The sight of the dilapidated structure sent a shiver down Lily's spine, but something compelled her to keep going, her feet moving almost of their own accord as she followed Mr. Turner inside. The interior of the theater was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of mold and dust. As Lily's eyes adjusted to the gloom, she saw row upon row of wooden puppets hanging from the ceiling, their lifeless bodies swaying gently as if in a breeze that didn't exist. Their strings led up to a darkened stage at the far end of the room, where the shadows seemed to deepen, obscuring whatever lurked within. Lily's breath caught in her throat as a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, thin man with his face hidden beneath a hood. His fingers twitched and flexed as if manipulating invisible strings, and as he moved, the puppets above him began to twitch and jerk in response, their limbs moving in eerie synchronization with the puppet master's hands. To Lily's horror, Mr. Turner stepped onto the stage, his movements matching the puppet master's every command. It was as if he were no longer in control of his own body, his limbs moving against his will as he danced and twirled at the puppet master's bidding. The sight of the once cheerful postman reduced to a lifeless marionette filled Lily with a cold, paralyzing fear. The puppet master turned his hooded head towards her, and though she couldn't see his face, she felt the weight of his gaze settle upon her. His fingers twitched again, and suddenly, Lily felt a strange sensation wash over her, a tingling in her limbs, a tightening in her muscles. She tried to move, to turn and run, but her body refused to obey. It was as if invisible strings had wrapped around her, binding her to the puppet master's will. Lily's heart raced as she struggled against the force controlling her, but it was no use. Her feet began to move, carrying her towards the stage where the puppet master awaited her, his hands twisting and turning as he pulled her strings. She wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but her voice was silenced, trapped inside her throat by the same force that controlled her body. The puppet master's face, still hidden beneath the hood, tilted in a grotesque mimicry of delight as he watched Lily's futile attempts to resist. Her body moved with stiff, unnatural motions, her limbs jerking and twisting as she was forced to dance to the puppet master's dark tune. The stage beneath her feet felt cold and unyielding, the air thick with the scent of decay and despair. As Lily's movements became more frantic, the puppet master pulled her strings tighter, his control over her growing stronger with each passing moment. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the twisted, grinning face of the puppet master as he orchestrated her final dance, his hands moving with a terrible grace. The next morning, the town was eerily quiet. The villagers went about their day with vacant expressions, their movements stiff and unnatural. No one noticed that Lily was missing, or that the old, abandoned theater on the edge of town had claimed another victim. The puppet master's strings were woven tightly around them all, and the theater remained dark and silent, waiting for its next performance. In the shadows, the puppet master's grin widened, and the puppets swayed gently in the darkness, their strings ready to be pulled. The town had become his stage, and the people his marionettes, doomed to dance to his dark tune for as long as he willed it. The Ritual Room. Hidden deep within the forest outside of town, there's an old, abandoned mental asylum known as Blackwood Asylum. Decades ago, it was the site of horrific experiments and dark rituals, leading to its closure. Now, the asylum is a crumbling ruin, its halls echoing with the screams of the patients who died there. The most feared part of the asylum is the ritual room, where it's said that a doctor-turned-cult leader performed ghastly rites to summon entities from another dimension. Mark, an urban explorer with a fascination for the macabre, decides to investigate Blackwood Asylum, lured by rumors of the ritual room. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, he ventures into the asylum late one night, the cold air biting at his skin. The building is in a state of decay, the walls covered in mold, and the floorboards creaking with every step. As he makes his way through the dark, winding corridors, Mark begins to feel a growing sense of unease. Strange symbols are scrawled on the walls, and he finds remnants of old medical equipment, rusted and broken. The deeper he goes, the more oppressive the atmosphere becomes, as if the very air is thick with the memories of the suffering that took place there. Mark finally finds the ritual room, hidden behind a heavy, rusted door. The room is dark and cold, the walls lined with strange symbols and old, blood-stained altars. In the center of the room, a large, circular table is surrounded by candles that have long since burned out. As Mark steps closer to the table, his flashlight flickers, and he feels a sudden chill run down his spine. The air in the room grows heavy, and Mark hears a low, guttural chanting coming from the shadows. The symbols on the walls begin to glow with a sickly green light, and the room seems to warp and shift around him. The table in the center of the room begins to move, rotating slowly as if powered by an unseen force. Mark's flashlight dies, plunging him into darkness. In the pitch-black room, Mark hears the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. The chanting grows louder, more intense, and Mark realizes with horror that he's not alone. The entities that the cult once tried to summon have been waiting, trapped between worlds, and now they have found a way through. The air in the room crackles with energy, and Mark feels something cold and wet wrap around his ankle, dragging him towards the center of the room. He struggles to break free, but the force is too strong. The last thing he sees before he's pulled into the void is the table splitting open, revealing a dark, swirling portal at its center. Mark's camera falls to the ground, the lens cracked, and the room goes silent. The next day, the asylum is found abandoned, but the ritual room is gone, replaced by a solid wall with no trace of a door. Mark is never seen again, but his camera is discovered in the forest, the last photo showing the ritual room, with something dark and monstrous emerging from the portal. The Whispering Door. In a modern apartment complex, there is one unit that no one ever seems to rent. Apartment 13B has a reputation. Those who have lived there either leave abruptly or simply disappear without a trace. The rumors surrounding 13B are unsettling, with stories of strange noises, cold drafts, and a whispering door that speaks to anyone who stands too close. Most dismiss it as urban legend, but the apartment remains vacant, a dark spot in an otherwise bustling building. Emma, a young woman new to the city, is desperate for a place to live after a series of unfortunate events leaves her nearly homeless. When the landlord offers her 13B at a suspiciously low rate, she hesitates but ultimately accepts, believing the stories to be nothing more than overactive imaginations. The first few days in 13B are uneventful, though Emma notices a persistent chill in the air, no matter how high she sets the thermostat. At night, she hears faint noises, what sounds like whispering, though she can never quite make out the words. She brushes it off as the usual creaks and groans of an old building and goes about settling in. But as the days pass, the whispering grows louder. It seems to come from the door of her bedroom, a thick, ornate wooden door that looks out of place in the otherwise modern apartment. The whispers grow insistent, almost pleading, but when Emma presses her ear against the wood, she hears nothing but silence. One night, after a particularly stressful day, Emma decides to confront the source of the noise. She stands in front of the door, her heart pounding in her chest, and demands that whatever is making the noise show itself. The whispering stops abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence that feels heavier than the air itself. She turns to walk away, but the door suddenly swings open with a creak, revealing nothing but darkness on the other side. The whispering resumes, louder now, almost as if it's coming from within her own mind. Despite her fear, Emma steps closer, peering into the darkness. The darkness beyond the door seems to pulse, alive with a malevolent energy. Emma feels a force pulling her closer, the whispers urging her to step inside. The words are clearer now, a cacophony of voices speaking over each other, telling her secrets, lies, and truths she was never meant to know. Her head spins, and she reaches out to steady herself, her hand brushing against something cold and smooth. It's a mirror, standing in the center of a small, dimly lit room that she has never seen before. The mirror's surface is dark, reflecting nothing but shadows. Emma feels an overwhelming sense of dread as she stares into it, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. The mirror begins to glow with an eerie light, and she sees something moving within its depths, something that looks like her, but twisted and wrong. The reflection steps out of the mirror, its eyes hollow and empty, its mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. It reaches for her, and Emma feels a surge of terror as she realizes that the whispers were not coming from the door, but from within her own mind, planted there by the reflection. The reflection grabs her arm, pulling her closer to the mirror. Emma struggles, but the reflection's grip is unbreakable, its strength inhuman. The room begins to spin, and she feels herself being pulled into the mirror, her reflection grinning wider as it steps fully into the real world, taking her place. The last thing Emma sees before she is swallowed by the darkness is her own distorted reflection, laughing silently as it turns and walks out of the room. The mirror's surface ripples, then goes still, reflecting only the empty room and the open door. The next day, Emma's friends and neighbors notice something different about her. She looks the same, but her behavior is off, she's colder, distant, and her smile never quite reaches her eyes. The whispers in 13B have stopped, and the door remains silent. The Whispering Violin. In the remote village of Shadowmoor, nestled deep within a valley surrounded by towering, snow-capped mountains, the people lived simple, quiet lives. The village, isolated from the outside world by the rugged terrain, had its share of superstitions and old tales, passed down through generations. One such tale was that of the whispering violin, an instrument of haunting beauty and malevolent power. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, warning of the curse that clung to its strings said to have been soaked in the tears of a lover scorned and betrayed. Esme was a girl with music in her soul. From a young age, she had been captivated by melodies and harmonies, finding solace in the notes that floated through her mind. She had taught herself to play the old violin her father had left behind, spending hours each day practicing in the quiet of her room, the music a balm for her restless spirit. But the violin she played was old and worn, its sound thin and reedy, and Esme often dreamed of finding an instrument worthy of her love for music. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Esme wandered through the outskirts of the village, she stumbled upon an old, abandoned church. The building was crumbling, its stone walls covered in ivy, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Curiosity piqued, Esme pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The interior of the church was dark and cold, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and decay. But as Esme's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something gleaming in the shadows near the altar. Her heart quickened as she approached, her footsteps echoing in the silence. There, lying on a dusty pew, was a violin unlike any she had ever seen. The violin was exquisite, its wood dark and polished to a rich, deep luster. The strings, though old, seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible melody, as if they were alive with the echoes of forgotten songs. Esme reached out to touch it, her fingers trembling with excitement. The moment her hand brushed the wood, a shiver ran down her spine, and she felt a strange, almost magnetic pull toward the instrument. Unable to resist, Esme picked up the violin, the weight of it comforting in her hands. She could feel the music within it, waiting to be released, and she knew she had to play it. Without a second thought, she carried the violin home, her heart pounding with anticipation. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the village was bathed in twilight, Esme sat by her window, the whispering violin cradled in her lap. She drew the bow across the strings, and the instrument sprang to life, its voice rich and resonant, filling the room with a haunting melody. The music was unlike anything Esme had ever played before, each note infused with a depth of emotion that seemed to reach into her very soul. As Esme played, she began to notice something strange. The violin's whispers, once faint and distant, grew louder, more insistent. At first, she couldn't make out the words, but as the music swelled, the whispers became clearer, revealing the darkest secrets of those who listened. The villagers, drawn by the sound of the violin, gathered outside Esme's window, their faces pale in the fading light. They stood in silence, mesmerized by the music, unaware of the danger that lurked within the notes. But as the whispers grew louder, the atmosphere in the village began to change. The violin spoke of hidden affairs, of lies and betrayals, of long-buried grudges and unspoken resentments. The secrets were twisted and cruel, turning friends against each other, lovers into enemies. The villagers, their minds filled with the venomous whispers, began to argue and fight, the bonds that had held them together unraveling before Esme's eyes. Esme watched in horror as the village descended into chaos, the music still flowing from her fingers, even as she tried to stop. The violin had taken hold of her, its whispers filling her mind, drowning out her own thoughts. She tried to put the instrument down, but it was as if her hands were no longer her own, the bow moving across the strings with a life of its own. The violin's voice grew darker, more malevolent, and Esme felt a cold dread settle over her. The whispers told her of the violin's origin, a tale of a lover betrayed, of a heart broken beyond repair. The violin had been cursed by the scorned lover, its strings soaked in the tears of the broken-hearted. It fed on the misery it created, growing stronger with each note, each secret revealed. Desperate to break free of the violin's grip, Esme tried to destroy it. She threw it to the ground, but the instrument did not shatter. Instead, it lay there, humming with dark energy, the whispers growing louder, more frenzied. The villagers, driven mad by the secrets they had heard, began to turn on each other, their eyes wild with anger and fear. Esme realized too late the true nature of the violin. It was not just an instrument, it was a weapon, a tool of destruction designed to tear apart the fabric of the village. The violin would not allow her to stop playing, its curse binding her to the music, to the darkness it spread. As the final note rang out, the violin's whispers reached a crescendo, filling Esme's mind with a cacophony of voices. Her vision blurred, her strength drained, and she felt her body collapse to the floor, the violin still clutched in her hands. The whispers faded into silence, and the village was left in ruins, the people broken and scattered, their lives forever altered by the secrets they had heard. When the villagers finally returned to Esme's house, they found her lifeless body, the whispering violin lying beside her. The instrument was silent, its strings still, its curse complete. The villagers, fearful of the violin's power, buried it deep within the earth, hoping to seal away its darkness. But the whispering violin was not so easily silenced. It lay dormant, waiting for the next musician to find it, to pick it up and play its cursed melody. The legend of the whispering violin lived on, a tale of sorrow and betrayal, a warning to those who would seek to uncover the secrets hidden within the music. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind howled through the mountains, some swore they could still hear the faint strains of a violin, whispering in the darkness, waiting for the next soul to fall under its spell.